You just heard her say, I've seen technicals be accessed for that. Natasha Cloud gets no tech. Caitlin Clark claps toward a player. It's a tech. Now, we got Alicia.
Natasha Cloud got in a referee's face, clapping, screaming, completely unraveling, on live national television, and the WNBA did absolutely nothing. Not a technical foul, not a warning, not even a stern look, nothing. And Caitlin Clark, the single most important, most watched, most consequential player this league has ever produced, cannot so much as clap her hands in the general direction of a player without the whistle coming out before her palms even meet. That is not an opinion. That is not a hot take. That is what the tape shows, over and over and over again. And today we are going to sit with every single disgusting detail of it until you fully understand the depth of what is happening inside this league. This is Rimrun, and today we are exposing exactly what this league does not want you to see. Let me set the scene for you, because the full picture here is so much uglier than the headline. We are not talking about one isolated incident. We are not talking about one referee having a bad night. We are talking about a pattern, a deeply entrenched, systematically tolerated, embarrassingly transparent pattern of selective enforcement that targets one player specifically, protects everyone around her, and has now escalated to the point where multiple players are crashing out in the same week, on the same national broadcasts, with the same non-response from the officials who are supposed to be in control of these games. And by the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly who benefits from that pattern, exactly who is enabling it, and exactly what it means for the long-term survival of this league. Because make no mistake, this is not just a story about technical fouls. This is a story about whether the WNBA is capable of protecting its own future, or whether the people running it are so consumed by their own petty, jealous, self-sabotaging agendas that they would rather watch the whole thing burn down than give Caitlin Clark the fair treatment she has earned every single night she steps on that floor. Stay with me, because this gets so much worse before it gets better. Let us start with the most brazen, most undeniable, most laughably obvious example of the double standard that has been rotting this league from the inside. Natasha Cloud, on a nationally televised game, losing her composure in a way that was so complete, so total, so unambiguous, that even the broadcast announcer, someone whose entire job is to stay neutral, could not keep quiet about it. Even the announcer on the call acknowledged it, said, and I want you to hear this clearly, sometimes it is called, sometimes it is not. Sometimes it is called, sometimes it is not. I want you to sit with that for a second. That is a broadcast announcer, on a national feed, watching Natasha Cloud clap directly in a referee's face, watching her snap and go off and carry on in a way that would have had Caitlin Clark hit with a technical foul before her second clap landed, and the best that announcer could offer was a shrug. Sometimes it is called, sometimes it is not. That is not a referee having a bad night. That is not an honest mistake in the flow of a physical, fast-moving game. That is a structural, institutional failure so obvious that the people paid to pretend it does not exist cannot even keep a straight face about it anymore. And here is what makes it so much more damning. This is not the first time. This is not a one-off. The transcript of what is happening in this league right now includes Paige Bueckers clapping, no tech, Caleb McBride clapping, no tech, Natasha Cloud clapping directly in a referee's face, no tech, and Caitlin Clark, the player every single one of these situations is being compared to. The player whose name comes up every single time someone asks why the rule is not being applied. Caitlin Clark claps and it is a technical foul, immediately, without hesitation. One standard for her. A completely different, infinitely more lenient, laughably inconsistent standard for everyone else. That is not me being dramatic. That is not some clickbait hot take. That is simply what the tape shows, game after game after game. But here is where it gets so much worse. Because Natasha Cloud's in-game meltdown was not even the most outrageous thing that happened. Not by a long shot. Because then you have Alicia Gray. Alicia Gray got hit in the face during a game. And look, nobody is dismissing that. Getting hit in the face is unpleasant. Getting hit in the face mid-game, in the heat of competition, with adrenaline already running high, is going to provoke a reaction. That is human. That is understandable. But what Alicia Gray did next was not just a reaction. It was a full, complete, undeniable march toward the opposing player with every intention of escalating that situation into something that had no business being on a professional basketball court. She got up, she stormed. She marched straight toward the opposing player, straight toward her, with the kind of locked-in, tunnel-vision fury that her own teammate had to physically shove her out of the way to prevent whatever was about to happen next. Her own teammate had to tackle her, out of the path, on a nationally broadcast game. Where was the technical foul? Where was the flagrant? Where was any consequence at all for a player who had to be physically removed from a confrontation by her own teammate? Now I want you to do something for me. I want you to picture Caitlin Clark in that exact same moment. I want you to picture Caitlin Clark getting hit in the face, getting up and marching toward the opposing player with that same energy, that same locked-in fury, requiring her own teammate to physically intervene. Picture it. Really picture it. Because you and I both know exactly what would have happened. The whistle would have been out before she took her second step. The technical foul would have been called before her teammate even had a chance to react. And the headlines the next morning would have been about Caitlin Clark's conduct, Caitlin Clark's attitude, Caitlin Clark's inability to control herself on the court. But Alicia Gray? Nothing. Silence. The refs swallowed their whistles and moved on like it never happened. And that is the thing that is so absolutely, mind-blowingly infuriating about all of this. It is not just that the standard is different, it is that the gap between the standards is so enormous, so grotesque, so impossible to explain with any honest reasoning, that the only conclusion a rational person can reach is that this is not accidental. This is not inconsistency born of human error. This is a deliberate, sustained, institutionally tolerated pattern of treating Caitlin Clark by a completely different set of rules than every other player in the league. Don't take my word for it. These are heavy hitters. Listen to what they said on camera.
To bomb on the refs post-game. Check it out.
Alicia, a little bit of frustration probably on that call. How do you keep working past it?
You just got to keep playing. I mean, refs are trash, but hey, we moving on from that. But hey, you just got to lock in, stick to game plan, just keep playing aggressive. And the biggest thing is just staying in our shots, forget the refs, and continue playing our game so we can come out with a win.
The refs are trash. The refs are...
They said it, out loud, on the record. The announcer on the broadcast, not a blogger, not a random Twitter account, not some anonymous source. The actual broadcast announcer looked at what Natasha Cloud was doing and said, out loud, that they have seen technicals called for exactly that behavior. And then the referee stood there and did nothing. Let me say that back to you in the harshest possible terms so you do not miss it. A credentialed broadcast professional, watching a live game, acknowledged in real time that the behavior on the floor in front of them was the kind of behavior that gets technical fouls called, and the referee, the person whose entire job is to enforce that standard, chose not to call it. Chose not to call it. For Natasha Cloud. And we already know what happens when Caitlin Clark does it. Now let us talk about the pattern, because this is where it escalates from outrageous to genuinely alarming. Because it is not just Natasha Cloud, it is not just Alicia Gray. The transcript of what is happening in this league right now reads like a catalog of unchecked behavior that would have resulted in immediate decisive action if the player involved had been Caitlin Clark. Paige Bueckers clapping, nothing. Caleb McBride clapping, nothing. And each one of these instances, each one of these moments where the whistle stays in the referee's pocket, adds another brick to the wall of evidence that the officiating in this league is not just inconsistent, it is targeted. Think about what that word means. Targeted. Not random. Not the product of referees having different thresholds on different nights. Targeted, meaning there is one player in this league who is held to a standard that no other player is held to. And the enforcement of that standard is so consistent, so reliable, so predictable, that it has become a known quantity. Caitlin Clark claps. Tech. Everyone else claps. Play on. And here is the part that is going to make your blood absolutely boil. Because this is not happening in a vacuum. This is not happening in some obscure low-stakes mid-season game that nobody is watching. This is happening on CBS, on national television, in front of the largest audiences this league has ever drawn. Audiences that are there, in large part because of Caitlin Clark. Audiences that showed up to watch Caitlin Clark. And what those audiences are watching, what they are being served week after week after week, is a league that cannot control its own games, cannot enforce its own rules, and cannot protect the player who is responsible for filling those seats and driving those ratings in the first place. That is a self-sabotaging, tone-deaf, institutionally negligent failure of leadership at every level of this organization. But here is where it gets even more damning, because then Alicia Gray went on camera after the game, on CBS, on the same national broadcast that millions of people were watching. And she said, and I need you to hear this clearly, she said the refs are trash. The refs are trash. On national television, on CBS, post-game, on the record. Now I want you to sit with that for a second. Really sit with it. Because I want you to think about what would have happened, what the reaction would have been, what the headlines would have looked like, what the league's response would have been if Caitlin Clark had said that. If Caitlin Clark, after a game on CBS, had looked into a camera and said the refs are trash on national television, without hesitation, without walking it back, you know exactly what would have happened. The outrage would have been immediate. The think pieces would have been written before the final buzzer finished echoing. The league would have issued a statement. There would have been fines, suspensions, formal disciplinary proceedings. Caitlin Clark's name would have been dragged through every sports media outlet in the country for a week. But Alicia Gray says it on CBS, and the reaction is, what exactly? Where's the league statement? Where are the fines? Where is the formal response from the people who are supposed to be running this organization? Nowhere. Silence. Because the rules, apparently, do not apply the same way to everyone. Don't take my word for it. Watch this. Straight from their own mouth.
I think she's spot on with everything she said. The hate that has been blatantly apparent from these players toward Caitlin Clark, the biasness that is showed like to other players.
The refs are trash. On CBS. Post-game. Unchallenged. Undisciplined. Unpunished. And now I want you to think about the enablers. Because this does not happen without enablers. A referee does not swallow their whistle on Natasha Cloud's meltdown without feeling confident that there will be no consequences for doing so. A player does not go on national television and call the refs trash without feeling confident that the league is not going to come down on her. This level of institutional inconsistency does not sustain itself without active, deliberate, top-down tolerance from the people who are supposed to be setting the standard. Which brings me to the thing that nobody in the mainstream media will say out loud. The officiating in this league has been so consistently, so egregiously, so embarrassingly bad, and so consistently bad in one specific direction, against one specific player, that you have to start asking the question that everyone is already thinking, but nobody with a press credential wants to put in print. Is there an agenda here? Is the selective enforcement of these rules the product of genuine incompetence, or is it the product of something more deliberate, something more calculated? Something that benefits specific people within this organization at the direct expense of the player who is keeping the lights on? I am not going to answer that question for you definitively, but I am going to tell you this. When the pattern is this consistent, this predictable, this impossible to explain through any honest reading of the rulebook, the burden of proof shifts. It is no longer on the people asking the question to prove there is an agenda. It is on the league to explain why the pattern exists. And so far, the league has offered nothing. Not an explanation, not an acknowledgement, not even the pretense of accountability. And here is the part that makes this so much bigger than just bad officiating. Because Caitlin Clark herself has spoken about this, and the way she has spoken about it tells you everything you need to know about the character of the person at the center of this story. Because Caitlin Clark, when she addresses the officiating, does not blow up. She does not go on CBS and say the refs are trash. She does not march toward opposing players and require her teammates to physically restrain her. She takes the high road. She has always taken the high road. Every single time, in every single controversy, in every situation that would have broken a lesser person. She takes the high road. She said this cannot happen to any player in the league, not just to her, to any player. She took a moment that was about the injustice being done to her specifically and turned it into an argument for fairness across the board. That is not the response of someone who is looking for attention or sympathy. That is the response of someone who understands that the institution she is playing in is bigger than any one player and who is genuinely trying to make it better, even as that institution fails her, repeatedly, publicly, and without apology. And she also mentioned the officiating, subtly, diplomatically, in the measured, careful way that she handles everything that would make any other person in her position lose their composure entirely. She mentioned it, and the fact that she had to mention it at all, the fact that the biggest star in this sport, the player who is responsible for the largest audiences this league has ever seen, has to stand in front of a microphone and diplomatically nudge the league toward basic fairness, is one of the most damning indictments of this organization's leadership that I have ever witnessed in professional sports. And here is the thing that nobody is talking about loudly enough. Linda Cohen of ESPN addressed the hate and the nonsense that Caitlin Clark has been facing. That is ESPN. That is not a fringe outlet. That is not a blog. That is the worldwide leader in sports, putting on record that what Caitlin Clark is experiencing is real, is documented, and is a legitimate story. And even with that level of mainstream validation, Even with a credentialed ESPN journalist putting it on the record, the league has not changed its behavior. The officiating has not improved. The double standard has not narrowed. If anything, it has gotten worse. Don't take my word for it. These are heavy hitters. Listen.
Stuff has played out. It's absolutely ridiculous. And you're seeing it play out day after day after day after day. The biggest star in the sport, they have no respect for, they're jealous, and
They said it. The hate has been blatantly apparent. The bias has been shown. The leniency given to other players. The freedom to clap, to confront, to carry on in ways that Caitlin Clark could never do is real, it is documented, and it is disgusting. And here is where we need to talk about the systemic angle. Because this is not just about bad referees. Bad referees are a symptom. The disease is something deeper, something more structural, something that has been building in this league for years and has now reached a point of crisis that the arrival of Caitlin Clark has made impossible to ignore. Think about what this league looked like before Caitlin Clark arrived. Think about the attendance numbers, the television ratings, the level of mainstream cultural conversation about women's basketball. And then think about what happened the moment she stepped onto a professional court. The numbers moved. The conversation shifted. The mainstream media, the same mainstream media that had largely ignored this league for decades, suddenly could not stop covering it. Sponsors came. Broadcast deals improved. Arenas that had been half empty were suddenly selling out. Not because the product changed overnight, because one player changed the equation entirely. And now I want you to think about what it means. What it really deeply, fundamentally means that the league, which owes its current moment of visibility and relevance almost entirely to that one player, is the same league that cannot protect her from being physically targeted on the court, cannot apply its own rules fairly when she is involved, and cannot even bring itself to discipline a player who goes on national television and calls the referees trash in a way that would have ended another player's season. That is not just hypocrisy. That is not just incompetence. That is a league that is actively, self-destructively, almost suicidally hostile to its own best interest. And the people at the top, the people who are supposed to be steering this organization toward the kind of sustainable mainstream success that Caitlin Clark has made suddenly, genuinely possible, are either too blind to see it, too cowardly to address it, or too deeply invested in the old guard's resentment to do what needs to be done. Let me be completely clear with you. The old guard of this league, the players, the coaches, the administrators who built their identities around a version of women's basketball that existed before Caitlin Clark arrived, many of them see her not as a gift but as a threat. Not as the person who is growing the pie for everyone, but as the person who is taking attention that they believe belongs to them. And that resentment, that petty, jealous, self-defeating resentment, has infected the officiating, infected the culture on the floor, and infected the league's willingness to enforce its own rules fairly. And here is the men's sports parallel that I want you to think about, because it is exactly the kind of thing that puts this in the sharpest possible context. Imagine, just for a moment, imagine if the NBA had a player who was responsible for the largest television ratings the league had ever produced, the largest arena attendances, the most mainstream cultural conversation. Imagine if that player was being physically targeted on the court in ways that other players were not. Imagine if that player was being held to a stricter standard by the referees than anyone else on the floor. Imagine if other players were going on national television and calling the referees trash, without consequence, while this player could not even clap without getting a technical foul. You know exactly what would happen. The commissioner would be on the phone with the referees union before the final buzzer. There would be formal reviews, there would be public statements, there would be consequences, real and immediate, for anyone who was seen as threatening the league's most valuable asset. Because the NBA, whatever its flaws, understands at a fundamental level that you do not let the people who resent your biggest star sabotage the product that your biggest star is building. The WNBA has not learned that lesson. And every single day that passes without them learning it is another day that the window of opportunity that Caitlin Clark has opened for this league gets a little bit smaller. And here is the thing that makes it even more egregious. Caitlin Clark was named an All-Star Game starter for the third straight year. 3 straight years. Fan votes, media votes. The people who actually watch this league, the people who are actually paying attention, have spoken clearly and repeatedly about who the face of this sport is. And the league's response to that level of fan engagement, that level of mainstream validation, is to continue allowing a culture of selective enforcement and unchecked hostility to flourish around the one player those fans came to see. That is a laughable, tone-deaf, institutionally negligent response to the greatest opportunity this league has ever had. And it cannot continue.
Exclamation point. The bad officiating in the WNBA has led to most of this minutia. Yeah, most of this controversy. All of these controversies. Be better, officials.
Disgusting. Absolutely ridiculous. Day after day after day. And the biggest star in the sport, the player who is responsible for the entire elevated conversation around women's basketball right now, is being shown nasty, ugly, relentless hate by the very people who should be grateful she exists. Now let me render my verdict. And I want to be very precise about this, because the stakes here are not abstract. They are real, they are immediate, and they are going to determine the trajectory of this league for the next decade. The WNBA's officiating problem is not going to fix itself. It is not going to improve through quiet internal conversations or politely worded statements from the league office. The only thing that will change this pattern is accountability. Real, public, consequence-bearing accountability for the referees who are applying different standards to different players, and for the administrators who are tolerating it. Here is what I predict. And I want you to hold me to this. If the league does not take dramatic, visible, immediate action to address the officiating double standard, if the next time Natasha Cloud or Alicia Gray or Paige Beckers or Caleb McBride does exactly what Caitlin Clark would be immediately penalized for and the whistle stays in the pocket again, the conversation about this league's legitimacy is going to reach a volume that even the most defensive, most complicit voices in sports media will not be able to ignore. The fans who came to this league because of Caitlin Clark are not going to keep showing up for a product that is visibly, provably rigged against the player they came to watch. They are going to leave. And when they leave, they are going to take the ratings, the sponsorships, the broadcast deal leverage, and every other piece of the economic infrastructure that Caitlin Clark's arrival made possible with them. And here is the prediction that I want you to really sit with. Caitlin Clark is not going to keep taking this indefinitely without it affecting how she engages with the league publicly. She has been diplomatic, she has been measured, she has taken the high road in situation after situation after situation that would have broken a lesser person. But there is a limit to how long even the most gracious, most professional, most genuinely committed athlete in the world can absorb this level of institutional hostility before it changes something, before it changes how she talks about the league, before it changes how her sponsors talk about the league, before it changes the calculation about whether this is the environment where she wants to build the next phase of her career. And if that calculation changes, if the moment comes where Caitlin Clark looks at what this league is doing and decides that her energy, her platform, and her extraordinary ability to move the needle for women's basketball is better deployed somewhere else, in some other format, in some other structure that actually deserves what she brings to it, the WNBA will not recover from that. Not in a year, not in 5 years, possibly not ever. Think about what that looks like. Picture the league offices 5 years from now, in a building that used to be full of energy and possibility and the genuine sense that something historic was happening here. Picture the executives sitting in those offices, staring at ratings numbers that have cratered back to where they were before she arrived, wondering where it all went, wondering how they managed to take the single greatest gift their sport had ever received and respond to it with jealousy, with institutional hostility, with a culture of selective enforcement so transparent that even the broadcast announcers could not pretend not to see it. That is where this ends if nothing changes. That is not a dramatic prediction. That is not some worst-case fantasy scenario. That is the logical, inevitable destination of the road this league is currently on. Because you cannot build something sustainable on a foundation of resentment. You cannot grow a sport by making its biggest star the target of the most egregious, most documented, most publicly visible double standard in professional athletics. And you cannot expect the fans who came to watch that star to keep showing up once they understand what is actually being done to her. The longer this league keeps making these self-sabotaging, cowardly, institutionally negligent decisions, the longer the people in charge of protecting this sport's future keep choosing the petty resentments of the old guard over the extraordinary opportunity that Caitlin Clark represents, the more likely it becomes that this entire fumbled, mismanaged, self-destructive experiment collapses for good. And when it does, the people who ran it into the ground will have no one to blame but themselves. That is not clickbait. That is not drama for the sake of drama. That is simply what happens when institutions fail to protect their most valuable assets, and The evidence has been sitting on the tape for everyone to see.
You just heard her say, I've seen technicals be assessed for that. Natasha Cloud gets no tech. Caitlin Clark claps toward a player. It's a tech. Now, we got Alicia.
The banned officiating in the WNBA has led to most of this controversy. Most of it. And the question being asked, whether there is an agenda here, is not a fringe question anymore. It is the question that every honest person watching this league is asking, and the league's continued silence in the face of that question is its own kind of answer. So here is what needs to happen, and I am going to be direct about this because the moment calls for directness. The WNBA's officiating leadership needs to be held publicly accountable for the pattern of selective enforcement that this video has documented. The referees who are swallowing their whistles for Natasha Cloud's meltdowns and Alicia Gray's confrontations while immediately penalizing Caitlin Clark for the same behavior need to face real, documented, career-affecting consequences. And the administrators at the top of this organization who have allowed this culture to take root and flourish need to answer for it. Publicly, on the record, in a way that the fans who are watching this can actually evaluate. The head of officiating in this league should be fired. Say it in the comments if you agree. Because this level of documented, sustained, embarrassingly transparent inconsistency does not happen without leadership failure at the top of the officiating structure, and leadership failure at that level does not get fixed with a quiet internal memo. It gets fixed with accountability. Real accountability. The kind that sends a message to everyone in the organization that this standard will not be tolerated. And I want to ask you something directly because I genuinely want to know where you stand. If Caitlin Clark had done exactly what Natasha Cloud did, if she had gotten in a referee's face, clapping, screaming, completely losing her composure on a national broadcast, and received the same zero consequences that Natasha Cloud received, would you be satisfied with that? Would you call that fair? Or would you be here in these comments saying that the standard needs to be consistent, that the rules need to apply to everyone, that the biggest star in the sport deserves the same treatment as every other player on the floor? Drop your answer in the comments. Tell me what you think should happen. Tell me whether you believe this officiating leadership deserves to keep their jobs. Tell me whether you think this league is capable of changing before it is too late, because the conversation in those comments is going to tell us a lot about where the fans who actually care about this sport stand. And that matters. It matters more than the league wants to admit. This is Rim Run. If this video showed you something the mainstream media is not covering the way it deserves to be covered, hit that like button right now. It tells the algorithm that this story matters. Subscribe if you are not already here, because we are not done with this story and you do not want to miss what comes next. And hit that bell notification so you are the first to know when the next piece of this drops. The tape does not lie, the pattern does not lie. And we are going to keep putting it in front of you until the people who are supposed to be accountable for it have nowhere left to hide.
To bomb on the refs post-game. Check it out.
Alicia, a little bit of frustration probably on that call. How do you keep working past it?
You just got to keep playing. I mean, refs are trash, but hey, we moving on from that. But hey, you just got to lock in, stick to game plan, just keep playing aggressive. And the biggest thing is just staying in our shots, forget the refs, and continue playing our game so we can come out with a win.
The refs are trash. The refs are, I think she's spot on with everything she said. The hate that has been blatantly apparent from these players toward Caitlin Clark, the biasness that is showed like to other players, stuff has played out. It's absolutely ridiculous. And you're seeing it play out day after day after day after day. The biggest star in the sport, they have no respect for, they're jealous, and they can...
Exclamation point. The bad officiating in the WNBA has led to most of this minutia. Yeah, most of this controversy. All of these controversies. Be better officials.